Senator from Hawaii, Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking forward to working with you. I will miss you on the Milcon VA subcommittee, but I understand and forgive you. Mr. Attorney General, thank you for being here. I want to follow up on a question that Chairman Moran asked about the citizenship question on the census. Communities of color, advocacy organizations around the census are frankly worried that the presence of that question is going to discourage participation in immigrant communities. And I understand that it's on the long form, and I understand that it's not without precedent that we're doing that. But I have two questions for you. First, how do you respond to those communities of color who are worried that this will simply scare people to not respond to the census at all, number one? And number two is, you indicated that the Civil Rights Division wants the data, and I'm wondering why.
I'll be glad to send you the letter that we've produced regarding this issue, detailing the advantages of it, having the information. I do note that it is being asked on the other survey, and I would suggest that I've learned it's the 12th question on the form, the last question, I believe. It shouldn't scare people. They don't have to answer it, really. And so I would think that that's a very reasonable thing, and I believe the concerns of it are overblown.
Okay, let's move on. I really appreciate what you're doing on opioids, and I am especially pleased that this committee and others are working in a bipartisan fashion to solve this problem. And I want you to interpret the following line of questioning not in an adversarial way. I want to ask you about medical marijuana. And I want to tell you that I'm the son of a principal investigator, and I came to the question of medical marijuana with great skepticism. But there are credible scientific studies that show that where medical marijuana is legal, opioid overdose deaths have gone down, and these studies are published in the Journal of the American Medical Association and the RAND Corporation with the input from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. The opioid epidemic is a major crisis, and I'm wondering whether you think, given your history as a successful conservative politician with a certain set of beliefs about marijuana in particular, whether given two things happening at once, there's all kinds of new data that shows an inverse correlation between the availability of medical marijuana and opioid deaths and opioid prescriptions and opioid illegal activity, and your commitment to try to reduce this opioid epidemic. Do you have at least an aperture to look at these data and reconsider your opposition to medical marijuana and marijuana in general?
Medical marijuana, as one physician told me, whoever heard of taking a medicine when you have no idea how much medicine you're taking and ingesting it in the fashion that it is, which is in itself unhealthy. However, I think there may well be some benefits from medical marijuana, and it's perfectly appropriate to study that. I do not believe at this point that, I think one study that suggested that there's some sort of inverse relationship between increased marijuana use and reducing of deaths. I did see that. I've asked my staff to take a look at it because science is very important. And I don't believe that will be sustained in the long run. The American Medical Association is absolutely, resolutely opposed to marijuana use. I think so is the Pediatric Association.
Sure,
they've studied it over years. So it's a matter of science, and
sure.
I think we should be free to discuss it.
My final question, the DEA in August of 2016 called for applications to produce more federally approved research-grade marijuana. Since then, the Department of Justice has received 25 applications, but none of them have been responded to either with an approval or denial? What is the status of those applications?
We are moving forward, and we will add fairly soon, I believe, the paperwork and reviews will be completed, and then we will add additional suppliers of marijuana under the controlled circumstances. But there is, a lot of people didn't know, I didn't know, a treaty, international treaty of which we're a member that requires certain controls in that process, and the previous proposal violated that treaty. We've now gotten language, I believe, complies with the treaty and will allow this process to go forward.
If the chair will indulge me, one final comment. We're all evolving on this issue, some quicker than others, maybe some too quick, and I really believe that we have to do this in the proper way. I think there are good civil rights reasons for decriminalizing and for pursuing a federalist approach around this, but if we're narrowly addressing the question of whether or not this is medicine, then we do need the Department of Justice, the FDA, and everybody to work together to pursue that question, double-blind studies and all. And I also think that we need to understand we are in a humanitarian crisis when it comes to the opioid epidemic, which means that we may have to cast aside some of the things that we've believed all of our lives as it relates to other drugs and look at harm reduction. I appreciate you keeping an open mind along those lines.
Thank you, Senator Schatz.
Senator, thank you. Senator from Oklahoma, Senator Lankford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me add to that conversation a little bit before I jump into a line of questions. I am one of those skeptical individuals that so far has not evolved on this issue of marijuana. I have a hard time believing that if only more of our parents smoke more marijuana, our kids would be so much better and our families would be so much better, and employment would be so much better if more of our employees smoke more marijuana. I just have a hard time believing that. And as far as medicinal issues, this is an area the NIH has done active work on, and NIH currently has several $1 billion that the Appropriations Committee has allocated to them to be able to study pain medications that are non-addictive to try to address that, and that was entirely appropriate to do. We have an opioid epidemic. I'd rather not swap an opioid epidemic with addiction to marijuana and just say we solved the problem. We didn't solve the problem long term, and so I'd love to be able to continue to maintain this. There are ways to be able to manage all kinds of different things to be able to manage pain, but my preference would be that our nation doesn't become more and more addicted to marijuana to be able to solve our opioid addiction.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to both you and the ranking member, know that I look forward to working with you as you execute this, this appropriations bill through your committee, and we'll move it on to the floor. I look forward to that commitment. Mr. Attorney General, it's good to see you again. Thank you for the conversation last week. I wanted to raise again with you the subject of marijuana. Alaska is one of those states that has moved forward not only with the medical marijuana, but also the sale and cultivation of recreational use, a very aggressive state regulation. This was not something that I had supported through that statewide initiative. In fact, I worked against it, but it was passed resoundingly through the state, and my constituents expect me to work to represent them. Mr. Chairman, I'd like unanimous consent to enter into the record a resolution that was recently passed by the Alaska legislature.
Without objection.
This is HJ Res 21. It was passed unanimously out of both houses, and it urges the federal government to respect the authority of the state of Alaska to regulate marijuana use, production, and distribution, and generally respect states' rights. Mr. Attorney General, we have talked about this in the aftermath of your decision to withdraw the Cole memorandum. I had been disappointed with that and expressed that I was concerned that the Department of Justice was less than a full partner with the states. I do understand that the White House has expressed support for legislation that will respect state supremacy when it comes to regulation in the spirit of federalism. I think that the comments that were made by my colleague from Hawaii in terms of members evolving on this is important, but I do think as we're seeing the states move forward, legislation like this is timely. The The states are telling us, though, that they need the Department of Justice to be a partner in the orderly administration of states' regulatory regimes and not standing in the way as an obstacle. So I understand your position on this. Again, we've had many conversations, but I would hope that we could have your assurance that within the Department of Justice, that the department will not be an obstacle to the consideration of this sort of legislation that may move forward.
Well, I can't make a commitment about what position we would take at this time until we know exactly what's involved, but it's not so much on a question of supremacy as a question of simple law. Alaska can pass laws about drugs that make certain drugs illegal that Washington does not make illegal, and therefore can't be prosecuted in federal court, but could be in Alaska. Likewise, the federal government has passed some laws regarding marijuana that I'm not able to remove from the books. Congress, you have passed them. They're on the books. And I just feel like that our priorities, look, I'll be frank, our priorities are fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine. People are dying by massive amounts as a result of those drugs. We have very few, almost zero, virtually zero small marijuana cases. But if they're a big dealer and illegally acting and violating federal law, our federal agents may work that case. I don't feel like I'm able to give a pass, some protection, some sanctuary for it. That's maybe the only difference we have at this point on how it would play out.
I do understand that. Again, I recognize that if there is a venue or an opportunity for us to advance legislation on this, that there is that open door for conversation about truly the inherent conflicts that we're seeing coming out of the states and working with on the federal level. Let me ask you about another issue that I raised with you earlier, and this is regarding support for tribal justice programs.